Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about information security management. This is module 15 in chapter 15 in your textbook CompTIA Security Plus. This also is going to help you prepare you for the CompTIA Security Plus exam. So this is straightforward. You should be able to explain asset protections and describe risk management. Protecting assets is at the core of information security. Asset protection involves asset management and change management. An asset is any item that has a positive economic value. In an enterprise, assets have the following qualities. They provide value to the enterprise. They cannot easily be replaced without significant investment and expense, time, worker skill, and or resources. And they come from part of the enterprise's corporate identity. So they can form part of the enterprise's corporate identity. So the different types of assets, data that's been collected, classified, organized, and stored in various forms. Customized business software. Software that supports the business processes of the enterprise. And system software, software that provides the foundation for application software. Physical items, computer equipment, communications equipment, storage media, furniture, fixtures, and services. Outsourced computing services. All of those things are important. And you can see data is extremely difficult to replace. And the customized business software has high value. So asset management is the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from its assets. To generate value from assets, there must be a systematic approach to the governance of the assets and proper utilization of the assets in a cost-effective fashion. Cybersecurity Asset Management, or CAM, is a process that combines asset management with information security. CAM can identify assets on a continuous and real-time basis. It can also identify the potential security risks or gaps that affect each asset through vulnerability scanners. CAM provides an up-to-date listing of assets that can immediately be referenced in the event of an attack. An asset's lifecycle begins when a need is first identified. From there, the asset is planned, created, or acquired. It is then operated and maintained, monitored, and replaced or upgraded when it reaches the end of its life. Costs associated with an asset are accumulated throughout its life cycle and can vary depending on the current phase of the life cycle of that asset. So here's an example, a picture of an asset life cycle. First of all, you have the requirements definition. Then you go to the right, asset planning, asset creation or acquisition, operation and maintenance, asset monitoring, renewal or rehab, and then finally when it no longer is useful, you dispose of it, and you go back to the requirements definition and you start over again. This might say replace a hard drive, it might replace a server, it might replace a printer, whatever asset we're talking about. So you monitor all the different costs. Here's the asset costs: operating costs, staff time, energy, office space, vehicles, and so forth. Preventative maintenance, renewal and rehabilitation here in the middle, corrective maintenance, inspections and condition assessments, and finally disposal here on the right. So look this over and understand what this graph represents. Okay. Asset acquisition, also called asset procurement, is the process of identifying and then securing an asset to support a business goal. Once the asset has been identified, approved, and funded, most businesses use a bidding process to ask vendors to submit a qualified bid. There are two types of bidding processes: standard bidding processes and e-bidding process. Asset management accounting is a process of determining and recording the ownership, who owns the asset, and classification into which category the asset belongs. Assets are generally classified based on one of three factors. How easy is it to turn the asset into cash? How will the asset be used? If the asset physically exists, a tangible asset is one that can be touched, and an intangible asset is one that has monetary value but no physical form. Asset tracking is the tracing the location of the tangible assets. It's important that you have a detailed tracking process as part of an asset management system for all assets. Inventory is the raw materials, works in progress, and finished goods that are available for sale that a business owns. Asset enumeration is a listing of the assets by a seller of those assets. The disposal of assets typically involves a two-step process. The asset should be withdrawn from service, asset decommissioning. Then the asset should be physically removed, asset disposal. Assets that contain valuable data should have that data transferred to a different device, data retention, before it's, quote, scrubbed, clean of the data, in this case sanitation. Paper media is usually destroyed by shredding. I mentioned in other lectures about Google Data Center. If you watch that video again, part of that shows where they remove a drive, sanitize the drive, and then for those drives that can't be fully verified as being clean, they destroy the drive after the drive's been scrubbed as best as possible. And it actually goes into a drive crusher. So that's interesting to watch. Again, just go on the search Google Data Center. Here's an example of what's called micro-cut shredding, because it's like a cross-cut shredder, so it's getting it both, so you end up with just like these paper chips. So it's not like a single shredder where you have strips of paper, but this is more like confetti. So your day-to-day business processes are called standard operating process or procedures, which can impact information security. Change management is a systematic approach in dealing with transformations, adjustments, replacements within an organization. Change management policies are formal statements that outline specific rules that must be met. Change management procedures are detailed mandatory steps that are needed to comply with a policy. So the documentation is critical, both to maintain an audit trail and to ensure compliance with internal and external controls. Change management watches for any adjustments or variations to assets that could impact security. Change management tools can be as simple as spreadsheets and flowcharts. In larger organizations, specialized change management software suites are used to maintain change logs digitally. So here's an example of a change management template. Here's a version control software screen. So here's our knowledge check activity number 1 for chapter 15. Which of the following is a listing of assets by a seller of those assets? Is that asset enumeration, asset inventory, asset counting, asset verification? Well, a listing is not counting and probably not verification, so it's going to be A or B as we narrow these down here. Okay, so listing of the assets is going to be asset enumeration. That's a listing of the assets by a seller of those assets. So you can think in your head the word enumeration means like a listing. You're listing it out. You're breaking it down into multiple parts. Okay, so let's talk about risk management. Because why do we need risk management? Well, if something goes wrong, that's a risk to our business. So the assets that are continually under threat, which is a type of action that has the potential to cause harm. Organizations must determine the chance that a given threat will compromise an asset, called the likelihood of occurrence. So it means how do you think it's going to happen? Risk is defined as a situation that involves exposure to some type of danger. The risk can be described as a function of threats, the consequences of those threats, and the resulting vulnerabilities. So that's part of your risk. Okay, so the following are different sources that can generate risk. You can be done internally, externally, through legacy systems, maybe they don't have the right patches and things, through multi-party, through software compliance and licensing. Maybe you have a piece of software that the license runs out and the software stops working. Risk analysis is a procedure to identify and assess the factors that may jeopardize the success of a project or reaching a state goal, often called risk identification. Following a methodology for performing a risk analysis is crucial. These include a risk control, self-assessment, and risk assessment. The Risk Control Self-Assessment, or RCSA, is an empowering methodology by which management and staff collectively work to identify and evaluate risks. A reason identifying risk is difficult is unconscious human biases. Again, a human bias is that they're tending toward one idea or opinion or another, a like or dislike or whatever. So you have aggregate bias, that's inferring something about an individual by using data that actually describes trends from the broader population. You have your anchoring bias, holding on to a specific feature or set of features of information early in the decision-making process. Availability bias, perceiving how likely an event is going to occur and how frequently the event is heard of. Confirmation bias, making a decision before investigating and then only looking for data that supports the theory. Oh my. Present bias, the trending to discount future risks and gains in favor of immediate gratification. Framing effect, deciding on an option based on how the choices are worded. Fundamental attribution error, viewing the failure or mistakes of others as part of their identity rather than attributing them to contextual or environmental influences. So risk assessment can be performed by the following schedule. A scheduled assessment, or a one-time assessment, whenever needed, ad hoc assessment, on a calendar basis, a recurring assessment, or year-round continuous assessment. Okay? So the frequency of conducting a risk assessment can be determined through the following two risk assessment approaches. A qualitative risk assessment uses an educated guess based on observation, typically assigns a numeric value 1 to 10 or label high, medium, or low that represents the risk. Quantitative risk assessment attempts to create hard numbers associated with a risk of an element in a system by using historical data. So if it uses historical data, it's quantitative. If you're um, observing or guessing. It's a qualitative assessment. The following quantitative tools can be used to predict the likelihood of the risk: the mean time between failure, the mean time to recovery, and the mean time to failure, and the failure in time. These sound similar, maybe different, or even confusing. We'll take them one at a time. The historical data can be used to determine the likelihood of a risk occurring within a year, also known as an annualized rate of occurrence. So, the law enforcement agencies, those are crime statistics of the area of the facilities to determine the probability of vandalism, break-ins, or dangers potentially encountered by personnel. Okay, insurance companies, risks faced by other companies and other amounts paid out when these risks became reality. Computer incident monitoring organizations, the data regarding a variety of technology-related risks, failures, and attacks. Okay, so the impact of that risk, or risk impact, involves comparing the monetary loss associated with an asset in order to determine the amount of money that will be lost if the risk occurred. The following formulas are used to calculate expected losses. If it's a single loss expectancy, or an SLE, that's the expected monetary loss every time that risk occurs. That annualized loss of expectancy is expected monetary loss that can be expected for an asset due to risk over a 1-year period. So is it going to happen every month, every 6 months, or whatever? How many times that single loss expectancy is going to happen? That adds up to your annualized loss expectancy. The risk exposure factor is a probability of that risk occurring multiplied by the total loss of the occurrence of the risk. So your risk register is a list of potential threats and associated risks. It can help provide a clear snapshot of vulnerabilities and risks. Risk registers may include key risk indicators, the primary risk factors, the risk owners, those responsible for the asset, and the risk threshold, the maximum amount of risk that can be tolerated. So then you create, or you have what's called a risk matrix or heat map. It's a visual color-coded tool that lists the impact and likelihood of risks. So here you have a risk register. Take a minute and look at this and get a better understanding of it. So you have your financial, attraction of a project investor, availability of finance, level of demand of the project, land acquisition, and high insurance costs. Those are the different risks that were identified for this particular project. Okay, and you give it a number: likelihood, the impact, the severity. So you can see the likelihood times the impact equals the severity amount. Then if that does happen, then you see here the, the mitigation strategies. And then once you've cleaned it up, is there any residual risk? What level of likelihood that it'll happen again, and the impact if it does again. And that becomes your severity of that risk. And you can see that first one is 4 times 3, or 12. Okay, here's a risk matrix heat map. You have, from the bottom left, you have limited, relative impact, all the way up to catastrophic. And you have your relative likelihood from low to high. So based on where you have it, then it's going to be either low, medium, high, or very high. So when you do have these risks, you want to be able to understand, can you tolerate that risk? So risk tolerance is a level of risk that an organization can accept per individual risk. Risk appetite is a total risk that an organization can bear in a given risk profile. So the risk appetite of an organization be conservative, little tolerance for risk, expansionary, higher tolerance for risk, or neutral, neither low nor high tolerance for risk. So managing risk involves using specific strategies, addressing third-party risk, and applying awareness management. So there are 4 strategies for dealing with risks. Do I accept the risk? It's acknowledged, but no steps are taken to address it. Do I transfer the risk? I give it to a third party. Do I avoid the risk? I identify it, but making the decision not to engage in the activity, so I'm just going to turn my head the other way. Or do I mitigate the risk? I attempt to address risk by making the risk less serious. I don't necessarily cure the risk, but I just make it less serious. Those are the 4 strategies for dealing with risks. A risk associated with using third parties is that it can be difficult to coordinate their diverse activities with the organization. Risks of third-party integration include the following: onboarding and offboarding, application and social media network sharing, privacy and risk awareness, and data considerations. Reducing risk with third-party vendors can be accomplished through requiring a close oversight of a vendor monitoring, and may include the following: requiring a completion of questionnaires about their supply chain security protections. Maybe demand that they perform regular penetration testing, requiring evidence of internal audits, create rules of engagement, and demand third parties follow due diligence. Okay? So vendor agreement examples include the following: service level agreements, SLAs, business partnership agreements, BPAs, memorandum of understandings, MOUs, non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, measurement system analysis, MSAs, memorandum of agreement, MDAs, work orders, statements of work, WOs and SOWs. So we understand that this is between your company and the third party. Security awareness management, or risk awareness, is the raising of understanding to all employees of what risks exist, their potential impacts, and how they are managed. The goal of this training is to help users achieve anomalous behavior recognition. Training should help users be able to determine that which is unexpected, unintentional, and as such it becomes risky. This is known as situation awareness. Different technologies, or rather different techniques employed for user training include the following: computer-based training, CBT, role-based awareness training, gamification, and phishing simulations. And here's an example of a phishing simulation dashboard. Okay, here's our knowledge check activity number 2. Which of the following is not a third-party risk? Onboarding, social media network sharing, risk awareness, and network assignment. Which of the following is not a third-party risk? Remember, we just talked about that. We mentioned, the different things that are third-party risks. We want one that's not. So 3 out of these 4 are true. We want to find the false one, or the one that's not a third-party risk. Okay? So it's network assignment. Network assignment is not a risk. Network assignment is not a risk. Okay. So this is a short chapter, so we only have two things to remember. Be able to explain asset protections and describe risk management. You want to rate your competence in the following module objectives on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 indicates that you have full confidence in your competence of that objective, and 1 indicates that you have little confidence in your competence of that objective. If you score less than 4, you should consider reviewing the module and related exercises. Again, remember, this helps prepare you for the CompTIA security exam, plus also for the exams in this class. And this is the summary, and that's the end of the chapter. Okay. This is it, and you have a nice day. All right, this is the end. This is the last slide of the chapter, of the course. Have a nice day.